I was here by like 9 something. It's really fast. I heard the conference went well. Everything was good. Yeah, it was good. A good blend. Yeah, behind the team. More people. It's good. Yeah, I think that's when you put on like a thing like this, that's always like the question is what do we do? But I feel like if you had better quality speakers maybe, and just not as many. Right. Right.
Go for quality.
Right.
So that's why.
Right. I think that's a challenge. What are we at there? Whatever you want, yeah. Let's do it. Here you go, I'll give you the mic.
Well, good morning, everybody. How did everybody have a good week at the convention? All right. I don't really need this, but I'd like to introduce Dr. Stephan Esser. He is a sports medicine doc in Jacksonville. He completed his medical at Harvard University and at the Mayo Clinic. He's been a member of the USPTA for the last 15 years, and before he started getting into the medicine, he was teaching full-time down in South Florida, right?
Perfect, beautiful, yeah. That's
Good.
it.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Have
Bill.
a good drive back.
Thank you. All right, so I'm excited to be able to be here. It's kind of, I guess, one of the closing talks. I really enjoy coming down and joining with the USPTA as this kind of keeps me on the court in some ways when most of my time is now spent in the clinic. I'm also a member of the Society of Tennis Medicine and Science, which is an organization that's kind of geared internationally toward injury prevention for tennis players and kind of research in that area. So today we're going to have some fun, I hope. Here's one of the closing talks. We're going to start out simple. We're going to review 3 major concepts related to injury. We're going to explore some opportunities for prevention. We are going to practice some on-site assessments, which I have up here, which I'll hand out halfway through. And we're going to have fun. And if you do not want to be called on as somebody who can assist me, just raise your hand when I say, will you join me? You can be like, no, sorry. So because we're going to do some interactive stuff, because that's the key. I want to give you some tools you can take back to the courts and apply right away, not just something that you can think about up here. So I broke this down, as I was thinking about, like, what are the key elements of injury prevention? When I taught full-time, so I taught, oddly enough, for Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago for a year and a half in Palm Beach. And then I also ran junior academies for the city of West Palm, had about 75 kids, and did that for a couple years. But my dad started Tennis Supply, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And so William Esser was his name. And so I grew up on the court my whole life, building courts and playing on courts, obviously. So really thinking about the more, the longer I'm in medicine now, trying to think about what are salient points that you can apply to your athletes that I wish I would have known when I was out teaching full-time, okay? Because the reality becomes a couple things. Number one is you care about people. So you want people to stay healthy on your courts, and you want to stay healthy. Number two is the bottom line. If you've got somebody gets injured, they're not taking lessons. They're not in your academy. You're losing money, right? That's a reality as well. So for both a personal reason as well as a societal reason, you really want to keep your players healthy. So I broke it down to 3 T's. Very simple. These are what you want to be thinking about. Number 1, time. We're going to break it down. Number 2, technique. And number 3, training or conditioning. These are the 3 areas that when you walk out on the court with an athlete, you should be thinking in your head, time, technique, training. So let's break this down a little bit together. Number 1, time. So I'll be honest, when I used to teach tennis, like let's say at Mar-a-Lago or the Bath and Tennis in Palm Beach, you had this window of time where people were in town playing tons of tennis, right? Christmas, Easter, all the big holidays, etc. So you said, hey, they want to take a lesson every day, 2 times a day. I'm in. Let's do it, whatever they want to do. The same with our juniors, let's say when they hit summertime, right? All of a sudden they have all this time and they're going to be out on your courts a lot more. But we have to be careful and conscientious of saying, well, is there too much time on the court that can increase the risk for this individual? Because we are the gatekeepers. You as the tennis professionals are the gatekeepers to success, but also potentially toward injury. So thinking in your head, if somebody says, oh, Johnny loves working with you, coach, and so we're just going to line up, 10 sessions this week because Johnny's in town. Well, is that really the best for Johnny, safety-wise, injury-wise? And we're going to talk about, is Johnny's technique good enough? Is Johnny's training and conditioning good enough that he could tolerate those 10 sessions? Or how do you need to modify what you're doing to keep him injury-free? So the frequency with which an individual plays, the duration of each episode on the court, the total volume, and then the twos, something else to think about for us, and inadequate recovery time. Thinking about these when it comes to time. So let's break down a little bit. Frequency, how many days per week, let's say. Duration, the total time they spend out on the court with you. Volume, the two of those kind of together. Then you've got the twos. The too far, too fast, too soon. So in running medicine, there's a key. We say your risk of injury is dramatically lower if you increase by 10% per week. That's it. No more than 10% per week. In the volume, the speed, the duration, etc. In tennis, we don't really have that. In pitching, we have pitch counts for baseball players. Little kids are not able to pitch more than X number of times because of the risk of injury. But in serving, I used to get the biggest basket out, get the kids out there. All right, here we go, 30 minutes worth of serving. Let's all do it together, right? These kids would hit hundreds of serves. Well, should we be thinking a little bit more about, are we going too far, too fast, too soon? That's the next thing. Let's say you've got a player who had surgery. They had surgery in the knee, had surgery, a more adult athlete, right? They had surgery in the shoulder. When are they really cleared to get back, let's say in the shoulder, rotator cuff repair, to overhead sport? So when can you start them? So for example, I have a protocol for my athletes when they get injured, have surgery in the shoulder. I want them back out on the court quickly, where they're right in here, maybe hitting some little volleys, hitting, from short court, mid court, just feeling the ball. We drop right to the low pressure balls and have them hit close. But I don't have them serving until months out. And so we need to make sure that you're collaborating with the healthcare professionals that you trust and know. So all of you should have, like in Jacksonville, a lot of the pros know me. I'm there, I'm available if you ever need me, I'm happy to talk to athletes, etc. So for you in your area, you should reach out. Who are the physical therapists that you have relationships with? Who are the doctors that you have relationships with? That you could go, oh, hold on, bing, bing, hey, yeah, can you see, my player so-and-so, he got hurt in the shoulder, are you able to get him in tomorrow? It's great. So I have that relationship with a bunch of the pros in Jacksonville, so they'll text me. I'll say, give me the name and number, boom, send it to my scheduler, I'll see the patient the next day. That makes the athlete feel like they're getting VIP service from their tennis pro, from the physician. It's a win-win for everybody, right? To be able to get the athlete in, get him evaluated, get him back on the court. But so think in your head, too far, too fast, too soon. So let's say somebody schedules a lesson with you, and you know that person had an injury of the knee a while back. Certainly, you're not going to just get them out there and start dropping them corner to corner, right, kind of running for the ball. You're going to say, hey, let's ease back in this together, working on timing, right, working on technique a little bit more, just from mid-court, see how things are going. Maybe that's all you do for that first lesson. So, but really thinking about that all the time with your athletes. And then their recovery time. This is an issue too. I have no doubt, and I hope you all are, that at the end of each lesson, right, you're saying, hey, what's your recovery plan for today? What's your meal? What's your recovery for tonight? Unfortunately, all too often it's, well, I played a bunch of tennis and I'm going to sit up at the bar and drink a few brews, right? Certainly that's not the best for the body to recover, and I think we can continue to encourage our athletes, how's your hydration status? Are you getting all of the deep greens, deep blues, purples, all the fruits and vegetables to help your body recover? Do you have a favorite thing that you can encourage them in to help with that recovery process? So to break it down, if you look at the science, most of the science, just like with the runner's science, says less than 10% increase per week. Well, with tennis, it looks like if athletes play fewer than 5 times per week, their risk of tennis elbow, for example, goes down significantly. Yeah, that's good to know about. It says if duration is less than 2 hours per time, their risk of injury goes down. Well, it's good to know if you have a person who's riddled with injuries all the time. Volume-wise, if you look at one of the recent studies by one of my friends at Emory, Neera Jayanthi, who's the president of STMS, they showed that in young athletes, if they played fewer than 16 hours per week of isolated just on-court time, they significantly reduced their risk of injury. So this is important for us because, again, we don't want our athletes, we care about them. We don't want them to get injured. So if you're looking at this kid and you're saying this kid's on the court 4 hours a day times X number of days per week, maybe you could start saying, hey, wait, we could still work on his tennis, but let's do it off-court training. Let's work on hand-eye coordination. Let's work on balance. Let's work on speed. Let's work on directional change. Let's work on tactics. You know, are we sitting down and still watching videos of play, et cetera? So there's a lot we could still do. It's not that we're saying, hey, you're either on the court with me or you're home, you're not doing any tennis. That's not it at all. But just thinking about the amount of time, the volume. When it comes to recovery, consider the age of the athlete, the conditioning of the athlete, their total health, and their on-court goals, etc. So when you think about recovery, for example, right before a big tournament, you're not going to push your elite level athlete to their hardest point because you need them recovered and ready for their tournament, right? Just like in running medicine and triathlon training, there is a taper period, right, where we train hard, and then slowly start coming down. We need to be thinking the same thing in our elite athletes. But when it comes to recovery, our older-aged individuals, perhaps during the summertime at great height of heat, are we encouraging them to have adequate recovery? And again, that's where you can make this great little handout. Just go online, go to ACSM, NACSM, American Medical Society of Sports Medicine, look up some recovery tips, and you can make your own little coach's recovery tips, right? And you just put the references at the bottom, so it's not like it's just you. You're saying, yeah, we're using the best evidence out there. But the American College of Sports Medicine, the American Medical Society of Sports Medicine, all have recovery tips. And you can make a little one for them on little stretches, on hydration after play, things like that. This is a great idea because it increases your professionalism for the athletes that you're caring for. Now again, each individual should receive individualized attention, right? So just thinking about that for them. Next, we've got technique. Actually, we'll back up for a minute. Any questions about the time stuff? Yes?
The extra hours you were saying can be on tactics and what other things?
So much work that you can be doing with these athletes, right? So if you're not on court just striking balls all day, what are they doing in the gym? What are they doing with flexibility work? What are they doing with pattern recognition? What are they doing with kind of self-assessment, right? There are all these little self-assessment questionnaires you could pull offline about kind of your style of kind of competition and how you deal with conflict or things of that nature. Seem a little hokey at first, but for your elite athlete, that does matter. For your more recreational athlete, though, we can work on balance, right? We can work on stability. We can work on directional change work. We can work on hand-eye coordination. All of the things where we're working with the balls on the court, perhaps, or off the court, you know, et cetera. So that also depends upon the flexibility of your athlete, right? We all know it. I still remember well. I remember going in all my whites, going to teach one day, and I walked on the court with this lady, and I was like, all right, we're going to be feeding some balls today. Step back on the baseline, and I started feeding her balls. And literally after like a minute and a half, she, no lie, throws her racket down and goes, I don't like this. I don't want to do this. And I was like, whoa, what is going on? Like, you know, and I said, well, what would you like to do? And she's like, I just wanted to hit today. I don't want to work on stroke technique. I was like, oh, okay. And it was a big lesson for me to begin to realize it wasn't what I wanted, right, or what I knew she needed. It was, at that moment, what she wanted, right? She was a consumer of what I was offering. This is when I was in the Palm Beach, right, working on the clubs, et cetera. And so from that point on, I started always going to the athlete. When they'd show up, I'd be like, so what are your goals today? What do you hope to work on? And how would you like to work on that? Live ball feeding, some point play, or fed balls. What would you like to do, right? Now, with people you have more of a long-term relationship with, right, you can establish goals and set them up incrementally, et cetera. When you got those people who are in town just for the holidays or whatever, and they show up, it can be a valuable tool. Because all of a sudden now, I was just a facilitator for those individuals. I was never in conflict with them. It wasn't weird. It was just, oh, what would you like to do today? And how can I help facilitate that and make that happen, right? I was there to provide for them, right, in a consumer culture, if you will. So really kind of thinking about what are the goals of the individual, and then how can you help to achieve them for them. And that's where you can think about all that off-court time. and participation. And it's not right for everybody, right? But for the individuals that are open to it and have goals out here, you can begin to say, well, I know your goal is to blank win this tournament, or B, get a better forehand, or C, work on your fitness, right? And so there are a lot of ways we can work on the fitness for you. I know you've said that tennis is part of your weight loss plan, right? Or that you want to be a collegiate tennis player, right? Or whatever it might be. So thinking about that, now as I go back in my brain, just like I do with my patients in clinic now, I have the advantage of saying, why are you here and how can I help you? And that should be the same in tennis. If I was back teaching full-time now, I'd really start making a little handout that said, what are your goals? And how can I help achieve that? And you can have A, B, C, D, E, F, G right on there that just said, my goal is to be fitter. My goal is to lose weight. My goal is just to have fun. My goal is to socialize. My goal is to go off to college tennis. My goal is to win a tournament, et cetera. But then you know what their goals are, and then you can say, well, I remember how you said your goal is to achieve blank. Here's the path that I would think would get us there. Kind of like a chiropractor sees a person and says, you have back pain. Well, I think it's going to take you 30 visits or 20 visits or whatever, and this is how we're going to do it, and here's how it's mapped out. Versus just you show up, get a lesson, and it's like, oh, I'd love to see you back if you want to, right? But then you can have that planned out, outline for them. Yeah. Any other questions about the time model? Yes?
Again, a few minutes late, so I'm not sure if you talked about this or not. And I know because of court time, a lot of pros are hesitant to make sure that their students are dynamically warmed up and stretched out before they do it, and then statically stretch at the end.
Right.
And that all helps prevent injuries.
Right.
And things. And I don't know, is that something that, especially if it's explained to their students why you're doing it, and maybe taking a few minutes of court time, and you feel it's important that they do?
I do.
People say, well, I want them to do it after the lesson.
Right.
Most people run in there a few minutes late and just getting there.
Right.
And then they're gone and they won't do either, and then they end up getting injured.
And we're going to talk a little about that a little later, but I think, so he was talking about dynamic stretching and static stretching, and do you build that into the lesson model? I think each pro is different. I've seen pros that have been very successful in incorporating that as kind of like, when we learned how to write essays, we always were taught there has to be an introduction, the body, and then the conclusion. And in the same way that when you're doing a lesson, there's that intro component, and so some pros are very good. They just say, this is just what we do, and it's fine. Now, if you're going into a new club, you've never worked there before, and there's a different model, right? Sometimes that can create some chaos. But if people begin to recognize why are you doing what you do, and again, that's where you could have at the club a little handout when you first start these things. It describes why is stretching important, or why do we do this? For me, when I taught full-time, yes, I did that. Every athlete, it wasn't an option, it wasn't a question mark, it was we do it together. Now what I would do so that they wouldn't feel like they were just killing time is, first of all, I jogged the lines with them. All right, how was your week? Everything's going good? Yeah. All right, so you've been trying to work on that forehand the way we had talked last time? That contact point's a little earlier in front? Yeah, okay, sidestep now. Okay, good. And so, right, so they're not feeling like I'm just going, hey, go run. I'm going to go sit over here and check my iPhone, right, and I'm charging you for this. But instead, there was that initial conversation right there going on with them, right? And we kept it, we kept it focused. It wasn't that I give them 30 minutes of things to do and then we hit for 5 minutes, right? But that a couple minutes there. And then at the end, the static stretching as well as we're going to talk about some strength training stuff. I think it's essential that you incorporate that where possible with every athlete, that you're doing some strength prevention work. And we're going to talk about why that's essential. But again, it's changing a little bit of the mindset from the old world of let's just get out here and hit some balls and leave the court, to know this is not a tennis player, this is a tennis athlete. A very different mindset, very different mindset. And it's something that we have to change in here in order to make it acceptable out here to the athletes that we work with. But I think you can really make it effective, and I think that's a great point. But again, you have to think in your own head, how do I incorporate this in so they don't feel like we're just killing time here? Yeah? Other questions? And if they become efficient enough at it and are willing to come early and do it, right, you say, go do it. And then, boom, we start right on the court together once you've done it. So a lot of my athletes knew that, so they'd start coming while I was over here still finishing up my lesson. They'd come and they'd be over there running, right, doing their little warm-up, et cetera. And I would just say, it matters to me that you never get injured. I take great pride in that my athletes don't get injured, right? A phrase like that. And so as a result, I try to stay up with the best science, right? So like today, you can go home and say, I actually went to the National Congress or National Conference and heard a bunch of lectures, and one of them, was about injury prevention. There's some key things that I think you and I can incorporate to help you be lower risk of injury, yeah, and be able to play longer for more years with less risk. So, but think about that, how you can verbalize it and incorporate it in. So now let's move on to technique. So you know how they kind of say real estate is about three things: location, 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 right? Same idea in so many ways for injury, I think. And it's technique, technique, technique. It is so essential. That's why I put it in the middle between the other two. It is so tempting for us when we teach lessons to do hit and giggle lessons. So tempting. And it's unacceptable, though, anymore. In today's culture, you guys are too good. You gentlemen, you ladies are too good to allow athletes to use poor technique in a way that increases the risk of injury, but let's also face it, never allows them to succeed to their fullest potential on the court. So make sure that you never give up, because we're going to have those athletes that you're going to work with who just go, no, 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 I don't want to change my forehand grip, you're killing me, da, 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 da. But you can keep on planting seeds along the way. Excuse me. Excuse me. Along the way. Of this is a little something you can change. This is a little modification you can make, etc. So let's go through. Number one, excuse me, most important thing, number one that we're going to talk about that forehand, first of all, is late contact. So I'm going to ask, you want to come up here real quick for me? Since you were kind enough to ask a question earlier, that's perfect. So I just want to bring, what's your name?
Brad.
Brad, where are you from, Brad?
From Miami.
Miami, thanks for coming up, Brad. Beautiful. So Brad's going to show us from a side view, kind of facing this direction over here so they can all see, forehand contact point where you feel like the ball should stop. Oh, you're the best. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. In reference to his body. So how does everybody else feel about that contact? Up or down? We all good with that? How many people like it?
I like it straight like Federer.
Okay. You like straight like Federer's. So you were further away from his body, and turn this way facing all the audience there so they could see where your contact point was there. So,
The elbow's too close to his body.
okay.
You got to get that elbow further away from his body.
All right, so a couple different perspectives. Other people, how do they feel? Anything? Maybe a little. My feeling about him when I look at him is he's a big, rangy guy. And so certainly he could get a little bit more away from the body, a little bit more out here, and I feel like he'd get even more power with less work. Right, because we all remember, if you open a door, if you hear the hinges on the door, here's the handle of the door over here. If you push out here, it's very easy to open and close the door, correct? If you push back by the hinges, it's harder, isn't it? So your fulcrum, the length of the arm of the door, influences how much power it takes or force it takes to open or close it. So there's a fine line there. If I'm reaching way out here, I lose power. But if I'm too close in here, I lose power as well. So there's that fine point, that sweet spot where in that contact point. So if we were working together, right, we'd say, okay, contact point in reference to the body, we like it's in front of the body at least. He's got an eastern bordering on semi-western grip, so that should be well out in front, correct? And then the question is, what about the lever arm length? Where is it in reference to his body that allows the fullest rotation of the hips and the shoulders to create the most power and then follow through? So I'd encourage him to just play with that a little bit, right? Kind of the distance from the body, see what it felt like, see where he'd get the most pop. But we look at this, if you are contacting the ball late, where does most power come from in the body? Which muscles? Legs and the core, correct? Those are large muscle groups. But if the ball is struck behind here, what now does all the work? The arms and the wrist and the forearm. So it pops this through, then compensates for the leg contact by rolling over quickly to try to create topspin. Versus that beautiful contact out here, where now the normal biomechanics of the wrist allow the rotation just to come through like that. Versus the artificial this, because he's so late back in here. So if you look at the studies on this, if we're catching late, we're increasing the risk throughout the upper extremity, that whole kinetic chain. The same thing with that backhand side. Show us your backhand if you would. And so where that, yep, contact point as well. So thinking about in reference to the body where that contact is. Now I might like to see, turn that way for me a little bit. Man, we're putting you on the spot, this is brutal. That's fine. And so kind of a thing. One thing that I'd think about for him, now again, so use your legs, do it all like you really would. Okay, beautiful. So you're doing a little bit more. I'd still like to see as much as we can that front shoulder down and in at that rotation point. So contact here, so the body weight is forcing in, then rotation through. But again, if contacted late, right, this is where we get into trouble with this forearm, especially if it's one-handed, versus contact well out in front where the heel of the non-dominant hand is driving the racket through the ball. So continue to think about contact point as the first step in the model. Now, why? I'm going to briefly just show you. Thanks, Brad. I'm going to take the racket for a second, just set it down. Stay here for me. Don't leave yet. So I'm just going to show you one thing quick here. So when we look at Brad from the side, very similar to this model here, you can appreciate the humerus, the arm bone here. The acromion is the bone above, right up in here. And in between is the most commonly injured rotator cuff tendon called the supraspinatus. That muscle comes through that little bony outlet. So between that bone and that bone, high risk of injury here. So when he's bringing that arm up like this, it's a pinch point. He's going to pinch, and then it's going to pass. So it comes pinch, and then it passes. So any motions that bring that arm right up into here is going to pinch. So when you think about that follow-through for your players, if they are coming through and you're saying, give me the windshield wiper, but they're doing elbow up, that's where they're pinching that rotator cuff. That's where they're going to be more likely to get injured and no longer be on your court. So we want to make sure their contact is happening well out in front, palm there. The elbow is staying below the shoulder level, and the topspin is created by the grip type and by the wrist releasing through the ball. So the elbow is staying below, right? Unless you're doing some extravagant thing like this for some weird little shot where you're on the dead run trying to twist it over the service, over the net. So think it in your head about that. Thank you. Thank you, Brad. Yeah, all right. Thanks for coming up. All right. So, the next thing we want to think about is the anatomy of that forearm. So you've got the flexors and you've got the extensors. The extensors on the top of the forearm coming up and inserting at the bone, and the flexors on the inside. So, we should be able to at least say to our clients, hey, you got flexors here and extensors here. They work together to allow your wrist to move back and forth. But if we overuse them or misuse them, you're more likely to get injured, right? You guys should be able to just basically say that, right? And they're like, oh, okay, I understand that. That makes sense. So think about it. If my wrist is way back like this, there's a huge force stretching out the flexors on the inside of my elbow. So if I'm catching that ball way back here, it's a huge amount of force here on right where that connects into the bone. This is called the medial epicondyle, and this is what they classically call golfer's elbow. But it's also if you catch the ball late repetitively with a forehand. So again, that timing is essential. And we have to think about how can we get the athlete to think about the timing. Number one, general recommendations. Just like we're doing, Brad would be showing me, hey, here's where I put your racket. This is how you do it. What about next? Awareness and demonstrations. I love videos. So videoing, pop your cell phone out, take a video, watch. I'm right here on the side, you're hitting on the ball machine. Oh, no, do you see where you're hitting that ball? It's way back in here. As they love to say, right, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So giving them a visual image. Next, you can say to them, I want you to start your backswing sooner, right? Get that right, start now. Split step, when your opponent hits the ball, right? That's the classic one, isn't it? So I'm on this side of the net, you strike the ball, I split step and start my racket back. All of a sudden I'm like, wow, I'm waiting. What am I doing this time? Well, you're going to go to the ball. Right? That's when you do all that new time that you have. Versus many beginners, right? What do? They wait till the ball is almost on their side of the court, then they quickly put the racket back and go. But if you can give them a specific time, that can be helpful. Shorten or modify the swing path. If we've got that person who's bringing the racket back to here, right? They're going to be late every time. They're breaking their body plane, right? That's what I used to, yeah.
Did you watch Madison Keys at the US Open in the finals?
I did not. This huge.
Yeah, I was very, very surprised.
Right, and there are some athletes, right, that can get away with crazy stuff that may not be what we universally want to teach others, And so we, because they're all, there's so many athletes that have gotten to an amazing level, but it doesn't mean that what they do is necessarily the best thing that we could do for other athletes. So I always talk about the body plane. So if this is my body plane and I rotate it here, my body plane's going straight through the center of me. I don't want you to break your body plane with your racket. So see where I went? Versus here. So when I'm taking that racket back, that it comes back on this side of the body. so it's in here, drops below, and then I can accelerate through versus coming back to here. That can immediately push me late, right? Because now my backswing is so huge. Next, accelerate that racket head speed. So working on the speed of the racket coming through. Again, that's where you can give them a lighter racket or a paddle, give them the little wiffle balls or the decompressed balls, and have them just work on the racket head speed coming through, creating that feeling to the ball. Next is strengthening the core and the proximal legs. Your athletes, let's say you've got a 55-year-old woman who's picked back up the racket, hasn't played for 15 or 20 years. No way. Power is not going to be coming from the core and all the rest of it. If she had a job sitting all day, or a gentleman who's just worked all the time sitting, the core and the proximal legs are incredibly weak. This is where you can have, here's my little workout program I want you to do every day in the gym, right? Or here's our trainer at the club that I'd like you to go do a couple sessions with, right? Or for your big groups, you invite in some speakers. So what we have done now with a couple of the local PT groups that I collaborate with is we go to some of the clubs and say, we'll come in and do a whole free dog and pony show for you. Right? So the PTs will come in and demonstrate exercises and stretches and teach it right before, let's say, one of your big evening classes, right? Where you've got all your teams, et cetera. That's, again, a win-win. You develop a relationship with the local healthcare providers. The athlete hears about and learns about somewhere they could go if they get injured, and they learn some tools. So it's a valuable thing that you can collaborate with. Also look at that racket weight, length, head size, et cetera. Is this appropriate for this athlete? Is it just too much at this point? And then, of course, the ball type, skill level. There is nothing wrong with saying to your adult athlete, I want to drop down for a while to a compression ball and work on timing and technique so that we can build your foundation. To hear that, though, it's all in the marketing. It's all in the marketing. It's not, well, you're not good enough to use the full balls, and so we're going to go to the baby balls. No. It's we need to build a firm foundation to build the rest of your game on. You've told me you want to be able to play this game for the next 20 years. That's what you've told me. So we need to build a foundation. You haven't told me you just want to come here and run around and play a little bit. That's different. Next, we're going to go to the open stance forehand, ruining the career of a lot of people, which is pretty crazy, right? You just saw Andy Murray with his recent hip injury, my favorite Guga, right, and others kind of damaging the hips. We're going to talk about why. So the hip is a ball and a socket joint. It's extraordinarily mobile, moves in all kinds of directions. But when you load the hip, when you stand and load the hip here, you are taking the ball and banging it into the socket every time. So I'm loading there, and I'm loading contact, and I'm loading contact right there. In fact, it is a test that we do for hip injury in the medical world. It's called flexion, adduction, and internal rotation. Oh, wait. That's exactly what I do when I'm doing my open stance forehand. So the hours that I spent on the ball machine where I tried to create that open stance boom and bah, coming through, I was just loading that hip repetitively. And when we look at certain players, so for example, Gustavo Kuerten, look at this loading. This hip is way back. He loads into it, rotates the hips, drives through from just that hip, and then comes out and opens. So if I'm repetitively doing this, boom, coming through, and boom, coming through again and again, I'm loading with repetitive micro trauma that hip. Remember, your hip is made of bone, has a smooth layer of cartilage over it, and then there's a little piece up in here called the labrum. It's kind of like a pool table bumper, and it sticks out. And if you load up into that, you can tear the labrum, and you can also beat up the cartilage layer on the top of the hip. So this is important because when you look at other athletes, so let's look at Federer, here's his open stance. Is he nearly as loaded as Guga? No. Here's his square stance and here's his closed stance, more or less. And if you look, there's a very different level of loading of that hip as compared to what we saw back here, where all of that weight is loaded on that back hip into here. So we get a lot of power, we get a lot of force, we get a lot of awesomeness out of that open stance, but we have to be conscientious that it's a double-edged sword for our athletes. And when you look, at this point, you should really be thinking, I need to vary the stance and practice and play. I should not have my young athlete stepping out there and for 40 minutes on a ball machine just striking forehands repetitively, deeply into that hip, deeply into that hip. We need to vary it with a closed stance posture and vary it with a square stance stepping in, right? Because classically, right, here's that open, load. Here's the square stance right here, so I'm more loaded here, but I'm sharing the weight between both hips. And there's more that closed stance here. Most of it's really on the front hip. This is essential. Our bodies are amazing, but they are machines, and just like a machine, if you run it in the same gear repetitively, right, you're going to have problems. And we all wear out, unfortunately, our bodies. Yeah, go ahead.
For open stance, like you just said, is there a softer way of loading the hip?
What we can do, so if you, like, so no, there is not a softer way to really load the hip. Yes, if you look at Gustavo, kind of the thing, he's exaggerating it, right? So our clay court players, can tend to boom, get down into here. So we can load it, like you're seeing a little bit more of there, but it's still loading. You know what I mean? It's the act of being on that dominant side, flexing down, and rotating. That act is heavily loading of that hip. What we can do, and that's what we were going to here, is really maintain the flexibility around that hip, because what studies show is that an athlete will lose the range of motion of that dominant hip over time, and it's a sign that damage is occurring. So that's where working with a good physical therapist in your community to teach specific stretches, et cetera, can be very valuable. So what you could do is you could say to the athlete, hey, I want you to sit, so you can have them, let's say, sit in a chair. If you're wanting to look, are they beginning to lose some motion, for example? And hey, just sit like this, good. And I want you to put your left foot on that leg, right? So you can see here how low that drops right there, my left side. Now watch my right side. It doesn't go down. So I have injured my hip as a result of this as well from years of doing that. So I have an internal rotation deficit. And a lot of the guys on the ATP actually have that from repetitive loading. So this hip does not go down as far. And you may find that one side like this is easy. This is totally comfortable for me. My right side here is up. So if you see that on an athlete, you should immediately say, let's get you to a good physical therapist. I want them to work on that hip a little bit. Right? Because that's where we're getting restriction around it. The other simple things, to jump to another joint, but we're going to look at some bioassessments later and on how to kind of screen some stuff. Go ahead.
One thing to consider, a number of the player development coaches now are starting to say you go open like more of an emergency situation if you have to. If it's just a regular rally, you're going more square neutral.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
So obviously the stance depends on the situation, the height of the ball, basically the ball you're receiving. What stance is safest for a forehand, if you can choose?
So I would argue that kind of a square or a closed stance is going to be safer for your hips. Right? So, and I think this is the challenge, isn't it? We want to produce the most power and the most performance for the athlete with the least risk of injury. And we can't go to one extreme or the other. And so that's why we, at this point, with the science the way it exists, trying to vary, like he was suggesting, what exactly we're doing. But I think the problem is an open stance forehand is still, for many, a throwaway shot in the sense of it's the easiest to do, right? In some ways, it's the lazy guy's shot. He's just here and just boom, rotate like that, versus actually stepping and doing something. So I would agree with the comment in the back that kind of varying it and trying to use more the traditional approaches to share the weight in the bilateral hips as compared to just constantly loading the one.
Is it possible to get the same amount of power on the square stance versus the open?
Hotly debated, right? I think, and that's where, you look at athletes like Federer, I think he can produce quite a bit of power, but can he produce the same amount of power as some of the big loaded, into here? Probably not, and that's the fine line, right? So, but maybe we use that as the closing shot, right? That open stance is the, versus every single forehand being struck like that.
The USTA high performance program, they had a trainer who was working with some kids, and he was talking about loading in a different way. So there's a couple different kinds of loading. So this would be a loaded position for them. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but and then there's the over twist of the shoulders relative to the hips. Does relaxing the hip-shoulder differential help things?
So what you want to think about is anything that's going to go flex, and this is going to increase your contact to the hip. So it doesn't, to me, whether you're here, right, you still have to rotate to create power, so you're loaded.
Well, so if you point that right foot more to the side,
So, but if I load here,
more like a lunge position.
it will give me a little bit more openness to the hip. so I might not contact as aggressively, right? So that you could think about that, you could try that, right, with the athletes as well. But I would still err away from this is the dominant forehand I hit all day, every day. And I think that's where we had headed as a tennis culture, the last 10, 15 years.
So the open stance sounds like it potentially is the most dangerous stance?
I would argue the open stance increases the risk of hip injury the most as compared to the other two stances. That's the way I'd verbalize it. Yeah. So, increasing our strength of those lateral hip muscles, all the beautiful sideline leg lifts and clamshells, all of the monster walks with bands around the ankles, all of that stuff that we can be doing as part of our training with our athletes on the court or with a trainer as well, I think are very important. But all of the dynamic warm-ups, the post-stretching warm-ups, all of that stuff is essential that we're getting our athletes to do. But then again, mechanically, that we're making those adjustments where possible. So the question will be, we want to salvage the open stance forehand, if you will, right? But is this opening that foot a little bit there going to do it enough for us? And that that would be my real question, because if you look at this, his foot is not facing forward, is it? Guga's. Yeah, but the amount of rotation that he's producing with his upper body, right, is resulting still in a huge loading moment on the hip. So until we have really good long-term data on some of these athletes and looking at the kinematics, they call it, like in the lab, et cetera, I think we just should be varying the stance as much as possible for our athletes and just not just beating up one position nonstop. Yeah? The next, abbreviated service motion, brought into popularity by Andy Roddick, of course, kind of. This way of kind of bringing the racket back and then popping the wrist up right into here. The problem is this really increases the risk of rotator cuff impingement. It also, for many people, decreases the likelihood of core use, et cetera. Why? Because they come into here and they're like, I got this little whippy motion that I can just go wham, wham, and pop that thing through and create a lot more power. But let me show why that's the case. You come up for real quick? So we're going to, what's your name?
Josh.
Where are you from, Josh?
West Palm Beach.
I know where you're from. Nice to see you, Josh.
You too.
All right, come on over here for me if you would.
Okay.
Right-handed, left-handed?
Right-handed.
Beautiful. All right, I'm going to have you turn over here for me if you would. Show us your service motion for a moment. Actually face that direction so the audience can see you. All right, so go ahead, racket, nice service motion. Just do about 3 or 4 in a row. Who taught you that service motion? I'm going to have you turn back over here facing that way. This is your net over there. So keep going for me about 4 times. Wait, that way. I was like, wait a second. Yeah, beautiful, good, and again. So does he have an abbreviated motion or a full motion? Keep going, keep going. It's dangerous to get up on the out there.
It's a hybrid.
It's a little bit of a hybrid, isn't it? Yeah, he's a little bit mixed in there. So go ahead, hold on to it again for me if you would. So here's the point. So if you remember how I drew or told you earlier, here's the humeral head, the arm bone. Here, up here is the acromion, the little bone above it. You can see it there. And the tendon is in between. So this tendon is at high risk of injury if he comes up right into here. Right in that moment, that's where it's be a pinch point. Now, if he comes back like this, rotates open, that rotator cuff has been brought to the back away from the acromion and then comes up here. It's no longer in a contact point. Now the challenge is, right, so if he comes here and pops right up, he's right under the acromion. Now there are players of all kinds and all levels, et cetera, who have made great success out of different techniques. I think what we need to be conscientious of, thank you for coming up, is a hand for Josh. There's it's a tough one there. Is that if I'm bringing that racket right to here, so watch right there. So here's my tendon, let's say, right here in the front. If I come like that, it starts rotating back, and now it's behind the acromion, the bone a little bit. It's no longer in a contact point. If I come right to here and I pop up, it's right in a point of contact. So a traditional service motion was here, right? This. Correct? Kind of bringing that racket back to here and there. Versus a more modified would be here, coming up like this, right into here, right? So you see Roddick's elbow used to kind of pop up like that as he'd kind of bring that racket back and right into here and then snap through. The argument is that if we bring the racket up at a halfway point in the backswing, we increase the likelihood of impingement or pinching of the rotator cuff. So just being aware when you're working with your athlete, how is that mechanic? Because what? I'm going to show you a picture here. See if it pops up right here. See this? This is a test. This is off Medscape, one of the doctor's things. This is called Hawkins. Hawkins is a test for rotator cuff pinching or tearing. How is that test done? Bring the arm up and do that. Wait a second. What is this? See that? If I'm bringing that racket like that. So if I'm bringing that racket here and then I'm popping it like that, I just did a Hawkins test on myself, which is a test for pinching of the rotator cuff. Versus if I'm bringing the racket here and then up there, the risk of pinching is much reduced. So this is important to think about kind of that basic mechanics of the body. That's why it's always good for us to get to hang out. But so this is a pinch point. And so any motion, like we talked about with a forehand coming up like this. I just saw 2 people last week come into my clinic for their rotator cuff, and they're big tennis players, recreationally. And I said, so tell me more. What had your coach been working with you on? Oh, my forehand. Oh, what are they working on? Topspin. Well, how are you creating it? Well, they've got me doing this and then kind of coming across like that. I said, come out in my parking lot. They always laugh because now when tennis players come, they know they're supposed to bring a racket with them. So I can pull them in the parking lot. And we're out in the back parking lot. And I'm like, shadow for me 10 forehands. And both of them were going boom and boom, right, to create their topspin. I'm like, well, there's your problem. You're going to tear your rotator cuff, which my surgeons will love, right? We'll get a nice, $20,000 surgery out of this. But the reality is this. Look at my forearm. It's open to the sky, and racket comes through here. Not this. Yeah? So any motion in which the wrist drops below the elbow increases the risk of shoulder injury. It's that simple. Your wrist drops below the elbow level, or your elbow goes above the shoulder level, increases the risk of shoulder injury. Okay? So think about that with stroke mechanics. Yes? Right.
The upper arm elevation degrees is 20, 30 degrees different than it is today, but how would you put into the biomechanics of that to incorporate what you just discussed?
Well, I think that once we're all the way up into this position, we're in a safer place. It's kind of that at 90 degrees where that pinch point is, where the risk is. So, yes? Right. Beautiful. And that's where you can, if the athlete is seeming successful at that shortened motion, you can say, all right, well, can we get you here? So there's a little bit, now again, what did I do? I brought my shoulder back further so it opened up that pinch point. That's exactly what you should be looking for, right? So if they're coming up right in here, that was my point, right? Versus if they're here, and they've cleared that roof, right? So if we go back to this, if you clear this roof, right, you're less likely to pinch. But if you don't clear that roof, that's where you're going to get into trouble. So thinking about that again, wrist, stay here, not the wrist, below, elbow up, right, for any shots that we're working on with our athletes. And what should we be talking about here, right, is avoid sudden and high volume changes. So, right, somebody's used to that full motion their whole life, and all of a sudden you're like, come on in here, let's work on it. And they're so focused on bringing the racket back quickly, they fail to rotate the shoulders. And all it takes is 20, 30, 50 serves, depending upon the age of that shoulder, right? And you might have a problem. And that's what we don't want. So there it was again, bring the elbow past the line of the shoulder prior to bringing the elbow up to the shoulder height. Maximizing the posterior shoulder strength and pecs flexibility. All right. Want to join me real quick? Yeah. How about it? It's like, no, not me. Shouldn't have sat in the front. What's your name?
Bunny.
Bonnie, where are you from?
Bunny, like a rabbit.
Oh, Bunny. Where are you from, Bunny?
Des Moines.
Very cool. Well, welcome. So when we're looking at this, right, want to think about a couple quick things. How many of you have bands courtside or in your bags? A lot of you? No bands or light weights or something or some sort of form of some light weight that you can do. But these are easy to travel with, and so I do like having a couple hanging out. But 2 or 3 simple things. I'm going to just have you take those real quick for me if you would. And I'm going to hand out, these are some of the exercises that I like a lot. Josh, do you mind handing out some handouts real quick for me? These are some tennis exercises. Feel free to use. Make your own versions. Hand them out, etc. Thank you. But we're just going to look at a couple, 2 or 3 simple things. Technique and form is what it's all about. I'm going to have you hold it first for me and just kind of hold it there. So I'm going to take it right here. If we want to strengthen, so what muscles in the tennis player become over-dominant? Everything on the front, right, especially on the pecs, all day long, we're rotating in here, we're pulling the arm through, etc. So what on average is under-dominant or weak? The backside, all those posterior muscles we talk about. Simple things can be valuable and powerful. So, number 1, first thing to always talk to your athletes about is posture. Are they walking around with their shoulders like this all day? Or are they walking around with their shoulders back and down, their chin tucked in, that military posture? Or Pilates posture, right? You got a hook in the chest, it's lifting you to the ceiling. That's how you want to be walking around. All of our people who are on computers all day, you should be saying to them, I need your computer screen equal with the height of your ears. Why? Because if it's lower, what are they going to do? Like that. What happens? The shoulders follow. Boom. But if the computer screen is up at the level of the ears, it forces the posture here. So that's a simple thing you could say. If your athletes are having any issues, or even if they're not, say, hey, how's your shoulder? I mean, how's your computer? Are you on a laptop a lot? If you're on a laptop, I need you with an extra keyboard, and I need that laptop up on a few books, etc. But so here we go. So we're just doing some simple things. Shoulders back and down, chin tucked in. I'm going to hold the bands. I'm going to pull straight back and hold. Trying again to get those posterior muscles, the rhomboids, all of the infraspinatus holding and really firing well. Same thing right there. You also see on your handout simple external rotators, right? The classic little things here. These must be done, though, first with the shoulders back, down, and pinched together. Then you begin the motion. So that we're here, we're building the body where you want it to be. You're not building the body, watch, shoulders rounded, and now I'm doing these. That's going to do me no good. So shoulders back, down, pinched, then you begin the motion, right in here.
Do you want that elbow tucked into the waist?
You can,
Like we're talking about?
yep, you can either have it tucked in or you can have a little ball or, a kind of roll a towel up, put it under there. Preferably kind of right so it's a neutral, kind of straight down from here. Not that it's all the way in. Yep, so right in there. You see it on the drawing. I think he's handing out. You'll see the pictures there. So I'm going to hold it for you, and let's take a little bit of a look at her form here. So we're going to have you comment if there's anything you want her to change different. Yeah, you're just going to tell her how she's doing, right? So you're just going to bring your both hands straight back like that and hold. Good. How are her shoulders? Do they need to be pulled back more? Are they good? What do you want? Okay, so here's what I want you to do first. Wait. So I'm going to have you pull your shoulder blades back and down, then tuck your chin in a little bit like that, and now do your motion. Good. And I'm going to have you now just pull back and hold. So pull back and hold for 10, 9. Pull the shoulder blades more. 8. There you go. 7, 6. Do you feel kind of a little bit of a pressure there in between the shoulder blades?
Yes.
Good. Keep going. No, keep going. I got long arms. And so kind of right in here, that's what we're looking for, right? To really feel a little bit of work there. Good. And so you can relax. Thank you for coming up.
Nice.
Thanks, Bunny. A hand, Bunny. So, but thinking in your head, how can I begin to incorporate a little bit of posterior girdle shoulder strengthening with this athlete? Because if there was anything that we could do with every athlete several times per week, it would be these. Because the posterior shoulders are so weak. And why does this matter? I don't have the other picture up there, but on the back of my shoulder are 2 key muscles. They're part of the rotator cuff called the infraspinatus and the teres minor. And these 2 muscles, if adequately strengthened, pull the arm bone down and away from the pinch point. Versus my pecs, if they're tight, they pull the pinch point forward and down, making me more likely to pinch. So just like you might think in your head, all right, well then the key is what? To stretch the front out and to strengthen the back. Those are the key thoughts in your head. So again, that postural awareness, then good strengthening the upper mid-back on a regular basis for our athletes. Next, low back injury. Avoiding repetitive spinal hyperextension if you're less than 15. Yes?
Yeah, going back to the shoulder, I see a lot of players where the right shoulder is lower than the left, the righty, and the left is lower than the right. Do these exercises help correct some?
In overhead athletes, the dominant arm classically is lower than the non-dominant. Doesn't mean it's okay, doesn't mean it should be, but to fix that and work on that, these are good exercises, but also we need lots of good sort of postural work. Because a lot of us will begin to get a little scoliotic curvature, and that's where we get this dominant arms a little lower. So that's going to be postural awareness. So I tell people, hey, when you're brushing your teeth tonight after your shower, right, I want you to look at yourself in the mirror and say, are things all lined up, right? Or have things started rotating a little bit? And if they have rotated, that's where good swimming, Pilates, right, all that other good work that works on posture is so important. Yeah?
People have to carry big tennis bags. Our athletes have to carry these book bags.
Mm-hmm.
Enormous amounts of books that are heavy, and oftentimes they're only carrying them on one shoulder.
Absolutely. I always say both shoulders at all times, number one. Number two is, if you insist you have to look cool and have it only on one, at least vary the side that you're doing it on and don't do it on the dominant side more often. Number three is I write notes all the time for my young athletes at school saying, let them use a pulley bag if they want, rather than carrying 40 pounds of books from class to class, which is so silly. Yeah. And you, again, though, if you have a good relationship with a local sports doc, right, you can do that. You can say, hey, can you write a note for my athlete, so they're not carrying their books to, every class? Right, exactly. So, but this part is important. So crazy study, British Journal of Sports Medicine. You can Google search this. Just look up elite tennis players less than 17, rates of back pain. And in all these kids who actually had no back pain in the British junior training academies, they did free MRIs. And they found that up to a quarter of them already had small fractures in their back. Because the spine is made up of bones that overlap with each other. And the repetitive extension motion of a topspin serve, if done without adequate strength of the core and hamstring muscles, just loads the bones. So kind of like taking a paper clip and doing that repetitively, it finally just breaks. So it's a real problem. I actually just had 4 kids over the last 3 days, all with fractures in their back. Now, it wasn't all tennis, it was gymnastics, it was football, etc. This is a very common injury because when we are between the ages of 3 and 17, our bones are still ossifying. They're turning into bone, so they're not fully there yet. You and I, when we hyperextend back, if I don't use my hamstrings enough, I just get a little arthritis in my mid-low back. But when you're a kid, you can actually fracture through the bones. So that's an issue. So if you've got one of your players and they always are complaining of pain here, they probably should be looked at by somebody. Maybe get some imaging, etc. But consider waiting for extreme topspin serves till more than the age of 14. Give that bone a little chance to have hardened further, and also their core muscles, hips, all the rest to have gotten adequately strong. It's very tempting to take that 10-year-old prodigy and just say, yeah, let's pop some topspin. Let me teach you how to do this. It's so much fun. But really, that's not in their best interest. As well as I said, varying serve types and avoiding sudden increases. This is where we're working toward, we should probably have like a pitch count in tennis, a serve count for our young athletes. They're not just going out there and crushing 300 balls and thinking that's normal. Next, forehand grip type. So if you were to use your hand and you wanted the most total power to push on something you're trying to move, what part of your hand would you push against it? The heel. So inherently, any tennis grip that allows the heel of the hand to be behind the strings will produce more power. So I completed a study, it's not published yet, 100 people who never had played tennis in their life, and I did it at Mayo Clinic, and we had a force dynamometer where they'd take a racket, push against the thing, and see how much power they could produce. They'd hold it for a second, and then release. And they did it early, mid, and late. We did it with Eastern, Continental, and Semi-Western grips. 9 different tests or 12 tests per person, etc. And demonstrated across men, women, age, everything, you can produce the most power with either an Eastern or Semi-Western grip, always, and when at an early position. Makes total sense. The whole idea here is we want to work smarter, not harder. So if your athletes or any of them are still using a continental grip for the forehand, we really need to change that. And we all should think in our head, nobody uses a continental grip for their forehand. And my athletes, I don't think. Yet when we did a 310-person survey study at Mayo when I was there, we found 30% of recreational athletes were using a continental grip for their forehand. And this was in athletes that were playing at a divisional level, really, in their leagues, down at the Daytona tournaments, et cetera.
Speaking of the continental grip, because I play full Western, but I teach continental all day long.
Right.
So what's your maybe suggestions? I need to maybe
Go toward more an Eastern or Semi-Western.
The reason I went to from the full Western to continental is so that I could take spin away.
Right.
So I'm hitting a flat ball.
So, but you're hitting continental.
Yes, I'm hitting continental.
So I would argue, so as a teaching professional who has adapted their ability and has remarkable timing, you're probably fine with a continental. Are you able to produce the most power with the least amount of work? No, obviously. But it's an acceptable grip for a teaching professional who's wanting to be a wall, right? But check this out for a moment. So if I have my continental, my location of contact has to be in the middle of my body. Because if I hit it out here, where's the ball going to go? Spraying, and then I'll have to do this to keep it in. So my contact point's in the middle of the body. What's working then? My wrist, my forearm, my shoulder. If I roll my grip to an eastern, where's my contact? It's no longer here. The ball will go into the ground. So now the contact has to be out in front. If I go to a full semi-western, can I hit the ball here? No, absolutely not, right? But if I hit it way out there in front of me, now my face is upright like it was here for continental. So just changing the grip type forces an alteration in contact point. You've seen that, right? When you've rolled something to an eastern, all of a sudden every ball's in the net and they're getting ticked off. And you're like, no, that's all right. Now we just need to work on the contact point. But so think in your head here, so if you are an expert, right, who's adapted well to this, yeah, that you could just kind of paw it in right in here or guide it to the target as the old style of teaching was, right? But as far as for our athletes, it is not an ideal grip that should be taught on a daily basis. That's saying that the amount of power that you can produce based on the studies that are done to date show these two produce about equal amounts of power, but the continental is the least amount of total power that can be produced. So, and then of course, obviously, control. If I'm coming through here with my contact point on my wrist, this is a huge amount of force to the continental. Versus biomechanically, a neutral position for my wrist is the friendliest. And if I have that shake hands grip or eastern grip, look at that, my wrist is neutral. And yet here, so it lays back for a moment coming through, but then it just rolls right through the ball. And like, look at the wrist though. The wrist is relatively neutral throughout this motion. It's just coming through. Versus here, and my wrist has to go pop, wrist coming across. Yes? About the? Correct. I mean, I think that whether you follow through over the shoulder or at the shoulder here, so long as that elbow is staying below the shoulder, or the wrist is staying, the wrist is staying above the elbow, that we're fine. So if you want to, you come through right here, that's fine, versus you're coming through here, that's fine. But not this. That's just the key. Yeah. So continental type obviously is excellent for our service motion, our overheads, and our volleys. And obviously that L conformation is a position of power for the wrist. When that wrist drops down here, huge forces through the tendons, the ligaments, and the cartilage of the joint, versus here we have really good supported state. The final one that I wanted to touch on here is really muscle firing patterns. I guess we're running out of time. We got to stop, I guess. So, but really is here. A lot of people don't realize how they're walking around with their forearm in a state of chronic stress. So if you see your athlete walking back like this, you should immediately comment on it. Look at my wrist. My racket is above my wrist right now. It tells me, whoa, 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 you're killing that hummingbird, right? You're crushing the handle. So, but really we need to get it in the non-dominant side. All of your type A personalities who come play tennis with you, look for that. Did they have these abnormal, aberrant firing patterns of their muscles? And they don't even realize it, right? That body awareness is so key. So you kind of read through that as I was talking. So you can kind of see some of those techniques. So when you are looking at an athlete, now this is the next thing. Start looking. I'm going to hand you, as we end here, I was hoping to go through it with you, and we can if you want for 5 minutes afterwards, but a kind of a body screen, a screening and looking at how does an individual look. If you see somebody who walks out to courts, let's say, for example, whose head is forward, whose shoulders are rotated, you should immediately go, oh, we've got some work to do off court as well as on court, right? And the way you verbalize this is you don't say, hey, you don't need me yet, get off my court, right? You say, I want to help you achieve your best tennis possible with the least risk of injury. I've noticed blank, blank, and blank, right? Same thing, if we see that person with that lordosis, right? They're kind of forward like this, that's that seated posture. I sit all day long, so my hips have gotten tight and my butt is weak. So what are we going to encourage them to do? Here's a handout on some stretches for your hips, whatever it might be, and then here's the strengthening of your butt, etc. that we can do. That we start improving some of the basic mechanics of the body.
I had a former gymnast who cannot not do that on her serve. It is just,
And is it because it's painful?
no, it's just her joints seem loose, and you look at her, she just is all over the place with her joints.
Interesting. So that would be a beautiful person to kind of say, hey, this is why you need to develop the relationship with the local PTs or doctors, stuff like that, and say, I'd really like somebody to come in with us even to the courts, or I'm going to go with you on my day off or whatever to see, you know, and this therapist, and I'd love to just see their opinion about stuff.
Yeah, she had that typical bolus or,
Uh-huh.
oh God, yeah, that takes so long
To kind of break.
undo.
Right.
So it's all part of the same.
Yes.
It hurts for me to just try to show you what it looks like.
So, but I mean,
How she does it.
and I think some of the points that were brought up in here are well spoken. The person with the right shoulder low on the left. Again, looking for symmetry of the body and symmetry of movement. The person who comes on your court who kind of has a little limp on that side. Hey, what's going on with your hip? You know, have you had that looked at, you know, et cetera? Everything's good here, you know, whatever it might be, right? So there's so much that we can do on the court for our athletes to prevent injury, right? And to prolong their performance and their function on the courts. So with that, we're going to close it down because I think we're running out of time. This was supposed to be our handout and breakout time. But, you know, take homes, think about time, technique, and training, right? Conditioning there, your 3 T's. Make a plan for warm-ups and cool-downs. We get to talk about it because I have it all in this other handout, but we'll do it afterwards if anybody wants to hang out. Look for functional asymmetry, which we'll do again with these handouts together if you guys want to hang. Be aware of predisposing weak and tight regions, right? Kind of the shoulder and the hip being key. Avoid sudden changes in technique or volume, and develop preventive strategies for your athletes, like incorporating daily stretching, like incorporating Pilates, swimming, you know, personal training, etc. Because the heart of this, it's so cool being a tennis pro. There's so much impact you have in people's lives on so many levels. And if you take it to the next level with injury prevention and with physical health, it is even more gratifying. So thanks for all you do, and thanks for a chance to come share with you guys. And I've got handouts of these biomechanical screens, if anybody wants them, the functional movement screens, which are great. Beautiful. So snag that.